On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we talk about augmented reality and how it's making industrial work more productive. Plus, Curtis takes us through hardware glitches and how it's leaving all kinds of hardware vulnerable to attacks. Plus, Curtis and I talk with Saeed Ouissal, CEO and founder of ZEDEDA, about IoT and Edge computing. Shouldn't miss it. TWiET on the set.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiET.
This is TWiET, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 364, recorded October 18th, 2019. TWiET from the Edge. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center is like no other testing and research lab, with more than $500 million of equipment, including OEMs like NetApp, and it's virtual, so you can access it 24/7. To learn more and get insights into all that it has to offer, go to WWT.com/TWiET. And by LastPass, a personal password manager and identity solution for businesses, all in one. You only need one master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Visit LastPass.com/TWiET to learn more. Welcome to TWiET, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Lou MARESCA, your guide through this big, giant world of the enterprise. But I can't guide you by myself. I need some help. I need to bring in the experts. And we're the dynamic duo for today. Our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin, senior editor at Dark Reading. Curtis, it's always great to see you.
It is delightful to be here, Lou. Can't think of anything I'd rather be doing on a Friday afternoon than being here talking with you and enjoying the company of the TWiET Riot.
Now, each and every week, more and more, we hear a little bit more about your projects, the gadgets you're playing with. You're starting to actually sound more and more like Cheebert, I think. What kind of stuff you got going on now?
Well, I have to say that Cheebert is rubbing off on me. I've got a bunch of things actually going on in the Raspberry and Arduino world. I've got a bunch of seeds going. I've got some some agriculture happening. I've always wanted to play with hydroponics. Now I'm controlling those, so that's happening. Got some ham radio stuff going on, and I'm helping folks get ready. We've got the Maker Faire Orlando that will be happening in about 3 weeks here in Central Florida. Been helping try to promote that, get the Robot Ruckus, that's our BattleBot arena, lined up, and helping my dear wife get her display ready, because she's a long-time exhibitor at Maker Faire, and I try to lend her a hand where I can. So lots of stuff going on, and it just keeps me happy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, speaking a little bit about IoT and gadgets today, we got a great guest, Saeed Ouissal from ZEDEDA, to talk a little bit about the growth of IoT data and the cloud. So we got a really great guest to talk about that stuff. Also, we're going to actually talk a little bit about AR. AR is coming back. Manufacturing is bringing it back. And we're talking a little bit about its applications and how some organizations are actually using it in the different parts of the market. Plus, Curt is actually going to take us through one of the latest hardware attacks as well. But before we get into all of that goodness, let's go ahead and jump into this week's blips. Now, understanding service costs and how they scale over time is something that consumers and businesses alike need for budgeting their costs of doing business. It's hard, actually, when companies actually cover up the bottom line with hidden costs masked as something else. Now, companies like T-Mobile have moved away from hidden costs, fees, and taxes, and they actually market this method as being the uncarrier. Now, sometimes services think the only way to mask increased costs or need to actually increase their revenue for that quarter is to hide additional costs inside of fees. Now, for years, the cable and broadband industry has perfected this sketchy and nefarious way of gaining more profit, and it lets that kind of advertise. They basically advertise one rate, and when you actually get your bill, it's a lot higher, right? You know that, but you've probably seen it. In fact, some of the worst offenders here are Comcast, DirecTV. But it seems they might have learned it from even the best at this, which is AT&T. Now, for a long, long time, regulators have looked away because they because the call out was in the contract that you signed saying that it isn't really false advertising for them to do this. Now, check out this new study, though. Nearly 25% of your cable bill or broadband bill is compromised of BS fees, netting over $28 billion in surcharges a year. Now, AT&T might get your blood boiling just a bit here. It got mine a little bit. They are now raising customers' broadband prices by as much as 7% to actually offset the costs for the company's property taxes. Now, let's say, I don't know about you, but that sounds a little ridiculous. Now, if you or your organization thought you were signing up for fiber or a fixed locked-in rate, you were wrong. Now, this new hike actually includes AT&T Business Internet, phone, and or Uverse TV. Now, this charge is not a tax or a fee that the government requires AT&T to collect from its customers. Now, let's talk about this. First of all, it isn't property taxes. Now, it's basically them trying to collect property taxes. And normally that's the cost of doing business for most organizations. Plus, if you sign a contract for a fixed rate, why can they actually rate hike you, right? Think about that. In a functional market, either competition would kick in normally and punish the companies for this kind of behavior in the form of either subscribers leaving, or regulators would step in and actually help at the very least. And they would warn the company for misleading and actually having predatory behavior. Now, in the U.S., the FCC and the lack of broadband competition in areas has put the power in the provider and their fixed costs. It actually might be time for you and your business to actually start fighting back and ask for your money back.
Well, we've seen Amazon devices entering the workplace, and if you've got some old ones, there's a warning to be had. Some old Amazon devices contain an even older Wi-Fi vulnerability called crack, or the key reinstallation attack. Crack is a flaw in the four-way WPA2 handshake that begins the protected transaction. Now, the vulnerability leaves the wireless traffic encrypted, but possibly routed through a malicious middle actor that decrypts the data, stores it for use, and then re-encrypts the stream and sends it on this way. Now, according to the ESET Smart Home Research Team, the first-generation Amazon Echo devices remain subject to this man-in-the-middle vulnerability designated CVE 2017-13077, as do Kindle 8th-generation ebook readers. Amazon has issued and distributed a new version of the WPA_supplicant. That's the vulnerable part of the operating environment. Both Amazon and the ESET researchers strongly suggest that all users make sure that the patch has been applied to their devices, and I would say that's an absolute mandatory requirement if those devices are going to live on your enterprise Wi-Fi network.
It's not easy always actually being a freelance writer, but it seems that the state of California wants to make it a bit harder to live as one. A new California legislation called AB5, if passed on January 1st, will have a pretty big effect on the gig economy. Now, the bill is targeted at cracking down on companies like ride-sharing giants like Lyft and Uber that misclassify would-be employees as independent contractors. Now, it codifies the 2018 Dynamex decision by the state Supreme Court while carving out some exemptions for some of the specific professions. Now, the exemptions are actually where the problems lie. If a freelance journalist writes for a magazine, newspaper, or other entity whose central mission is to disseminate the news, the law says that journalists are capped at writing, quote, 35 submissions per year per employee. And that puts actually put this into some perspective for you a little bit here, is that the current range that freelancers can make is as low as $25 a submission up to high end of about $1 per word. Now, this would almost prevent them from making ends meet even for a month before actually hitting the cap. Now, the workaround for this would be requiring that writers would actually need to develop an even broader base of editorial contracts. And as an unintended consequence, this would result in even greater competition in that area, and it would eventually lower the opportunities. Now, this is an odd law to go into effect. If we look closer at the bill, AB5 What targets freelance journalists is the B requirement of legislation, so-called ABC test, to determine if a worker is an employee or actually an independent contractor. Now, the B test requires that a freelancer performs, quote, work that is outside the usual course of hiring entity's business. Now, if you think about it, by definition, freelance writers do the same or if not similar work as a staff writer for editorials, just less frequently, making them an independent contractor and subject to the 35 submission cap per year. Now, the backers of the bill are saying that the goal of AB5 is, quote, to protect and preserve good jobs. We're trying to create new good jobs and livable, sustainable wage jobs. I don't know if it's actually meeting those requirements, but we'll actually see here. Freelancers typically do not enjoy employee benefits like paid leave, sick day, health care, and retirement benefits, nor are they covered by workplace civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination, and they have less recourse if laws are broken or fees aren't paid on time. Now, this could backfire on California, forcing some publications to perform business outside the state of California or subsidiaries to ensure that they can maintain their writer talent base. Some won't bother, though, unfortunately, reducing the number of writers, costing more stress on the current staffers. Now, national outlets are actually staying quiet, and they're staying quiet on the law itself. But another shot in the foot for freelancers is the AB5 affects freelance writers who incur expenses to craft their stories when they will no longer be able to actually write them off on tax returns. But they will, however, not have to pay the 15% self-employment tax. You may be a writer, or you might have a favorite one out there that works out of the state of California. It might be time for you to contact your state representative and vote to not pull in AB5 to law.
I have lots of opinions on that one, but rather than talk about that, we'll look at another current event. Typo squatting websites are proliferating in the run-ups to U.S. elections. In another sign that the internet has become the newest venue for political battles, the sheer number of websites that have sprung up that appear designed to confuse or take advantage of people following the 2020 U.S. presidential elections. Researchers from Digital Shadows recently looked at just how many domains they could find that appear to be targeting users who accidentally mistype the website address for a U.S. political candidate or an election-related domain. They discovered over 550 phony websites for the 19 Democratic and 4 Republican candidates and 11 other election-related domains as of September 20th. Without calling out one candidate or one party over another for these typo squats, it's clear that the political battles are not just taking place on the debate stage or the media, but expanding to the cyber realm as well. That's from a statement made by Digital Shadows. Now, the company's research uncovered 66 domains with political-sounding names hosted on a single IP address by an entity with an address in Panama. Though domains were all registered in the last 40 days. Nothing at all suspicious there.
So when new devices are released with new technology, it feels almost like a gimmick until people start using it. Now, I remember when Microsoft actually released the Microsoft Kinect, people thought, it was just a glorified webcam. Now, just this past week, Google got a little taste of this a bit with their latest release of the Google Pixel 4 that actually houses a tiny radar chip inside of it that drives their latest technology called Motion Sense. At a first glance, it's a new sensor that probably won't benefit users too much, but Google thinks this thing will actually protect your presence. Now, there are deeper roots to most new technology, and Motion Sense has no exception. It comes from a project called Project Soli, and it's the first commercial application of it. Now, the gap between things that Motion Sense could do and what it actually does in the first version is pretty big. In theory, putting radar in a phone is actually pretty revolutionary in itself, but in practice, it could be seen as a gimmick. Now, Motion Sense has essentially 3 types of interactions, 3 of them. The first being presence. It creates a net of awareness around the phone, especially when the phone's actually laying beyond the physical body of the owner. It's actually has a hemisphere with a radius of about a foot or 2, and it just keeps eye out to ensure that you're nearby, and it turns off the always-on display if you're not. Now, the second interaction is reach. Now, the phone pays attention to see if you're reaching for it, and then quickly turns on the screen and activates the face unlock sensors. If an alarm or ringtone is going, the phone automatically quiets down a bit when it sees you're reaching out for it. Now, finally, gestures and users' interaction with the phone. You can give it a quick kind of wave to dismiss those calls or snooze alarms. You can also swipe left or right if music is playing to go forward or backward. Now, the question is here, why a radar chip, right? Why not just add a camera to this thing? Well, first thing is radar actually takes less power than a camera. Second, the sensor is actually not meant to identify you. Just understand that it's just basically there to understand users' presence. So the technology doesn't need to actually have a line of sight camera to do so. Plus, the technology can work through materials where cameras, unless infrared, cannot. If nothing else, Google might surprise you with this simple technology and bring new capabilities that you've never seen before to the device. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, we have the bites. But before we get to the bites, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Worldwide Technology. Now, if you ever get a chance to visit the Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center, you should go, because this thing is a truly amazing site. They began building it almost 10 years ago, and it's been growing exponentially. It really is like no other testing and research lab that you've ever seen. Now, listen to what the lab contains. More than $500 million in equipment from hundreds of OEMs and key partners ranging from heavyweights like NetApp, Cisco, and VMware to actually emerging disruptors like AT&T, Equinix, and Expanse. Now, when you're developing products, you want to work with an organization you can trust, right? Well, WWT is that trusted partner. They will stay with you for over the years. In fact, many of their customers have been with them for over a decade because they know WWT is where they can go to get the answers they need to make sure their business runs right. Now, with all that it has to offer, the ATC really is an incubator for IT innovation. Now, listen to what else it has to offer. It has on-demand and schedulable labs like NetApp Cloud Volumes, ONTAP on Flash, NetApp Disaster Recovery, and as a service, along with hundreds of other labs representing newest advances in flash storage, multi-cloud, hyper-converged infrastructure, cloud data management, and more. It's all in that whole package. They've worked with large products before, and you've been trying to actually release large products. Well, sometimes you want to try and build products before you know what the industry has to offer to help. Well, the ATC can help you learn about products before you launch. WWTs and engineers use these environments to quickly spin up proof of concepts and pilots using their sandboxes so customers can confidently select the best solutions. In many cases, it actually reduces your concepts and time to market by half. Now, in many cases, they actually offer, in most cases, in all cases, they actually offer lab as a service and is dedicated lab space within the ATC. Now, here customers can perform programmatic testing using their vast technology system that WWT has already built. Now, it's virtual, so you can actually take advantage of it and their unique benefits anywhere in the world 24/7. Now, WWT's engineers work in these labs every day. They beta testing new equipment and building reference architectures and customer integrations to actually help their customers make decisions and see results faster and with much less investment. If you've been eagerly awaiting and a way to get to the market faster, the time is finally here. WWT has launched their new digital platform encompassing the ATC ecosystem. Now, this ecosystem creates a multiplier effect of knowledge, speed, and agility anytime, anywhere around the world for their customers. Now, get access to articles, case studies, hands-on labs, and other tools that make the difference in today's fast-paced world. To learn more about WWT, the ATC, and sign up for access to their new on-demand lab platform, go to wwt.com/twit. WWT simplifies the complex. That's wwt.com/twit. WWT, delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. And we thank Worldwide Technologies for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, let's go ahead and jump into this week's bites. Now, we all know that AR has been around for a while, right? It's been around for a while, just like VR has been around, and we've kind of seen a slow adoption of the technology in the market. We've seen some gimmicks things, some games. We've seen the Microsoft HoloLens. We've seen them kind of demo that and show scenarios where they can do trainings and other things. But we haven't really seen all different facets of the market take it on. Now, it's kind of one of those technologies that has amazing potential for the different sectors of the market, but it hasn't really been applied yet. Well, there's actually an interesting application here. Now, there's a company called Veolia Water Technologies. Now, it's a transactional water treatment specialist firm. Now, this sounds exciting here, but it is a partner where they actually been partnering with a company called FieldBit to actually bring AR, augmented reality, to the plant floor. Now, this might not be in your wheelhouse, but the AR has really made a difference in this organization. So let's get into what it actually does. First thing is users can now experience AR marked up. They actually can experience the views of AR markup of their equipment, and it actually can have spaces through smart glasses such as WheelWare's HMT1, or by using an Android smartphone app to mark up video from the phone's camera in real time. If you've used Pokemon Go, it's similar to that. Now, FieldBit's application sounds much better than Haynes' manual, though. Once a procedure has been worked up and added to the knowledge base, field workers can actually access it by first selecting the pump or the machine model that they need, and then selecting the procedure, which they could be replacing a filter or replacing the assembly or in general repair item. Now, in the future, field techs will be able to actually just aim their phone at or glass directly at the machine and have a relevant KB article or procedure pop up automatically that the company can actually help them repair or do work on it. They can even have AI image recognition for different aspects of that. Now, once the worker selects a repair or maintenance procedure, the FieldBit app actually walks them through the step-by-step procedure. And at each step of the procedure, it actually highlights different parts, bolts which they can loosen, or they circle things that are red they shouldn't touch on the video and on the headset in real time. Now, this is interesting because this allows their company to not only train people on the job, but bring the information to their fingertips. Curtis, I want to throw this to you first because, well, actually, I want to throw it to you only because there's only two of us. But I want to throw this to you because you actually had a prediction, right? A 2019 prediction that AR is going to finally go mainstream, right?
Yeah, and that wasn't, from my perspective, something where I was going way out on a limb, because I've talked to manufacturers and users of augmented reality in a number of different situations, and it just has a great deal of potential for business operations. I've talked to people who use it in areas like maintenance. A couple of years ago, spoke with the customers of Epson, which is not just a printer company, but they actually have a substantial augmented reality glasses business. They're using them for fighter jet maintenance in the field, where a mechanic can wear these, go up, be looking at a jet engine deployed anywhere around the world, see the item, and if it requires replacement, while they're still there on the airframe, they can tap it, pull it from inventory, or find out where it is in the system. And things like that applied not only to the very high dollar maintenance like fighter aircraft, but things like HVAC. Things like process control in oil refineries. These are all areas where the augmented reality makes a substantial difference in how productive the people can be as they're doing maintenance, how safe they can be, and then how productive that very expensive equipment can stay, because it is maintained and repaired much more quickly. So I think things like that are driving it. And as the higher volumes of equipment help the price come down, I suspect we're going to see augmented reality in more and more situations, not only in what we'll call blue collar and technical work, but I suspect it's going to be moving into more managerial and white collar tasks as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the interesting thing here, another trend that we're maybe seeing here as well, is some of the platforms like Android and iOS. Now, Android actually is starting to trend more and focus more on their mobile AR. their AR Kit and AR Core, because they actually saw quite a bit of increase in 2018 and 2017 in this area. And so they're focusing more on actually producing more and more functionality within this kit. So that's actually interesting because that means they're actually seeing some market shift and some more focus on that area. Another thing that I actually saw that was really interesting here is the fact that there's lots of different ways that the retail is starting to take this on. In fact, I was on my phone just recently looking to buy a new television, and of course, the Amazon app on both Android and iOS allow you to, place take your phone out, shoot it towards the wall, and actually see the TV on the wall. So make sure that it fits and how it's going to look up there, which is interesting. That's for consumers. But also, if you flip the bit and look at organizations as well, like Home Depot or House or Wayfair, or any of these companies out there that are trying to sell home furnishings or they're trying to sell equipment of some type. It allows consumers and businesses to review this equipment in the space that they're going to go. So you might find the dimensions and so on online, but being able to really experience it within the space is something that retailers haven't been able to do until date. And AR is really helping that. So that's something pretty interesting that can actually help as well. Now, navigation is another one. I've seen areas where different applications can kind of take you through, like, let's say a mall or even a business or a data center, and allow you to actually walk through the data center, and it will tell you, okay, these racks over here are for this trunk, and these racks over here for the firewall, and so on and so forth. So somebody who is new, who hasn't been there before, somebody who's going to repair a device that's in a rack somewhere deep in the data center, these applications can actually help them navigate internally through a map system to actually find their location. So I think this is going to have a large effect on the market, and it'll continue to do so. Curtis, you talked a little bit about manuals and so on. Now we've seen in the past, kind of the Chilton Hayes automotive repair manuals, where you kind of open them up and they show you kind of the blown out view of a car or a machine of some type, and then you kind of go in and start finding these things and maybe fixing something, finding the right part, repairing the part. Is this something that will, as we've seen with this other FieldBit application, is this something that those will be a thing of the past? If you could just pull out your phone and pull up a car manual and or a machine manual and just kind of start fixing things, is this going to make that kind of market obsolete?
Well, I'm not sure that it makes it obsolete, but I do think it changes the market. You mentioned Chilton, and I have a bookshelf full of Chilton manuals for current and previous vehicles. But I have no trouble imagining the Chilton app that, as you say, puts the augmented reality display up there as you're in the engine compartment or as you're looking at doing a brake job or whatever it might be. I think that would be superb and a tremendous use. I think there are also some things that are happening in the office environment, especially as quantitative analysis of various trends becomes bigger and bigger, and the data sets get more and more complex. I thought it was interesting. The very first time I was able to do an Oculus Rift session wasn't at any sort of gaming thing. It was at SAP's Sapphire Now conference. And I put on the Oculus Rift and walked through a massive multi-dimensional data set and was able to pull things out. I believe we're going to see more of that as meetings take place that involve more complex data. We've talked about big data so much, but being able to actually visualize what's going on, being able to understand what that very rich data means is made simpler when something other than just the tabular representation of a spreadsheet is involved. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I was reminded of that actually this week. One of my favorite authors, a man named Edward Tufte, has written a seminal book called The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, which I recommend to just about everyone. And being able to put that into multi-dimensions, being able to bring it out from the printed page to an augmented reality meeting of professionals, I think is going to make a huge difference in how well we're able to make use of all of this analysis that modern systems are able to give us.
It's interesting. I think there's actually some additional, more on the communication side, telecommunication side as well, some additional applications here. If we think about it, a lot of these companies which allow for remote collaboration, like Zoom and Skype, Teams, Slack, those kind of companies, they allow organizations to actually collaborate remotely. But the interesting thing here is there's also the remote assistance side, it's the walkthrough side, allowing organizations to actually to have you walk you through something. Let's say it's constructing a device, or it's putting together something, or it's writing some code or doing something. And this kind of experience can almost provide a holographic style experience, so that the person on the remote side can actually walk you through something on their side by providing this kind of AR experience. So I definitely think there's going to be a trend of additional applications here. This is just the start of it, as we see in the manufacturing side, but I'm sure more and more we'll start to see applications come to market, and we'll actually be surprised by them. Well, let's go and put that one to bed. Let's go jump into the next one. Kurt, I'll throw it over to you. We have some more hardware attacks, right?
We do, and this one isn't particularly new, but it's something that I was doing research on because it pops up every now and again. It's an attack type called glitching. Now, we've all experienced things as technology users where some bit of technology, whether it's a microwave oven, a cable set-top box, computer, whatever, you get a power interruption. And it doesn't have to be very long, but it essentially resets the device. Well, what people have figured out is that if you know the device intimately and you have access to that device, you can basically inject either high or low current situations, or you can play with the clock, because the system is going to assume that an instruction will have so long to execute, and the next execution is triggered by typically a rising edge of a signal. You can disrupt this. And in disrupting it, you can cause the system to skip instructions, or to give you an opportunity to inject an instruction because the system is momentarily trying to figure out what comes next. Now, this glitching, as I said, it's not new. The first academic papers were written on it close to a decade ago. But we do see it coming up again and again, because much like the speculative execution side channel attacks that have grabbed the attention of so many people, the Spectre and meltdown attacks, these are not the sort of relatively straightforward, relatively simple to execute attacks that have a big payoff for a lot of systems under attack. Now, these are typically things that are going to be launched against very specific systems where the attacker has some very specific outcomes that they want to see on that system, whether it is pulling particular kinds of data, say an encryption key, or gaining access to a system that is headless, basically that doesn't have any sort of normally accessed user interface. Now, what we're seeing is more people examining these, both because security in other areas has tended to get better, and because, well, let's be honest, anytime you can set an army of graduate students loose on a problem, you're probably going to find some examples of solutions, even if they aren't the most practical. So glitching requires physical access to the system. It requires some very, very detailed knowledge of the application that's going on and the timing of everything. And it requires the ability to inject signals to disrupt the normal flow. So obviously, it's not something that you're going to be able to do remotely. This is not the sort of thing that you're going to be able to put a piece of malware in a phishing message and get it out there either by email or by text message. But for some specific applications, especially in the IoT and process control, it's worth being aware that glitching exists and can have some consequences. Now, Lou, you develop for what are some pretty complex systems in terms of the Windows environment and where it's going to be deployed. Is the state of the system something that people at the application layer normally have to be aware of, or is that the kind of thing that you tend to, well, trust the operating system folks to take care of?
That's a really good question. I think it's normally you actually focus on letting the hardware or the operating system itself take care of these types of things, but normally the hardware, the firmware take care of it. For instance, an encrypted secure boot on your machine. Those are some things that you would tend to say, hey, my device is encrypted, it's secured, and only if I put in my passcode, decrypt it, and so on, I'm secured. But if there is a vulnerability, like for instance, if there's something like a fault injection attack, or somebody comes in and finds a vulnerability in that system, to kind of get you through the workaround to not have to worry about entering a passcode, then you're in trouble. And there's actually a lot of opportunity here where that people find vulnerabilities in application layers or service layers because of these types of glitches. And this happens not only on services, but also, hardware devices that you use every day, from screwdrivers to, to even, we talked a little bit about a couple months ago about the Intel PCs or CPUs that were affected by the floating point units that were affected, that had a vulnerability in them that people were actually using. Like you said, most of the time, most of the time you have to be physically have access to the device to do these types of attacks. But once you do have access, if you know how to get through and produce these glitches, it might unlock your ability to work around things that are normally there to secure you. Now, go back to your question about doing it at the software layer. There are some software techniques to guard against these types of attacks. And so obviously no pointer checks and making sure that you don't corrupt memory references and pointer references and so on in your software is one of the most important things. Checking and sanitizing data and instruction sets when you're actually performing calculations and so on and so forth. Those are things that are normal processes that people follow when they're developing software. But again, normally you kind of rely on the hardware here, and hardware is supposed to be getting more and more secure. So, this is a definite threat going into the future for sure.
Well, to me, one of the things that this does is just sort of reinforce the notion that when you're thinking about cybersecurity, physical security needs to be part of that. Because let's face it, if an attacker can grab a laptop, go off and spend all the time in the world with it, they have a much greater chance of finding some sort of exploit that they can take advantage of. I love the idea of exploring things like glitches. I will admit, in addition to simply being able to cover these, I love the thought that goes into it, love the creativity to finding things like this. But that also means, since the folks with malicious intent are working so hard to find them, that the people charged with securing systems have to be just as thoughtful, just as prepared in figuring out how to defend them. So be warned, think about glitching, and well, there goes another peaceful night's sleep for the security experts. Well, with that, I think we've reached the end of that bite. Lou, I think I'm going to turn it back to you to take us on to the next part of This Week in Enterprise Tech.
Thank you, Curtis. Well, next part is my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the TWiET, right? But before we go there, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is LastPass. Now, people have their favorite tool that saves them time and money, and LastPass is mine for sure. I love LastPass. In fact, I've used it so often, I don't even know I'm using it anymore. It's one of my favorite tools. Think about it. You have a username and password for each and every site you go to, every site, especially the ones that are most important to you, right? Like your financial sites, your business sites, your social networks, your email, you name it. For me, I have 5 different banks, right? So I'm supposed to have a different username and password for every one of those sites. It becomes almost impossible to remember and manage all of those. And you don't want to write them down on a sticky note because somebody can find it, right? You don't want to put them in your email because somebody can get into your email and find them. And you don't want to lose them, right? So what's the best next course of action? Well, that's where LastPass actually comes in and saves us all. LastPass automatically remembers and fills in your passwords anytime, anywhere, whether you're on your computer or your mobile device. All you do is remember your master password, and LastPass remembers the rest. Now, I've got hooked on starting to use it on my desktop, but now I use it on every one of my devices. They have browser add-ins, and they make it really easy for you to log in and do web logins from anywhere, application logins from anywhere. It supports browsers like Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Opera, and more. Plus, it actually works with your device, so Android and or iOS. In fact, I use the on my iOS device all the time, and I can tell you, it's so easy to use. No matter what site I go to, it automatically sometimes autofills and logs me in right away, or I can just tap on it and ask LastPass to fill it in. Now, it adds peace of mind here that your data is actually encrypted and decrypted at the device level. Then this means that the data stored in the vault is kept secret, even from LastPass. Now, I remember the day I was at work, my family called. They said, hey, we have to pay this service. We have to pay the bill. We don't remember the password. All I did was log in with my master password, got the password, gave it to them. They were able to pay without getting any late fees or anything like that. So it definitely saved us time and money. But one thing we've been talking about is my personal use here. But LastPass actually recently set up an expanded business lineup with some amazing features that actually will improve security across your company and actually make your life easier for your users. Now, for instance, LastPass Enterprise includes a single sign-on for over 1,200 or plus SAML integrated apps, each with its own getting started guide, and it's simple to get up and running really fast. Now, LastPass MFA leverages actually your biometrics here, like your face, your fingerprint, even contextual factors like your location or your IP address to actually know who you are and who you say you are. Now, LastPass Identity is actually in combination of LPE and LPMFA. Now, from single sign-on and password management to adaptive authentication, LastPass gives granular control to IT and frictionless access to your users, all in one simple, secure solution. I can tell you that this is all true. It definitely removes the friction, removes that impedance in any type of login or authentication scenario. Now, LastPass makes it easy to use unique random passwords like that your employees don't have to remember or write down. In fact, every employee has their own secure vault for managing and accessing passwords. Now, get this. This will probably raise some eyebrows to those IT admins out there. They also have Active Directory integration. Awesome. That means that you don't have to remember any passwords, not just your AD password, and that will be your vault password. And it will allow you to not only do that, but also gives you that ability to federate to access the view or services or even test passwords. It's so easy. One password to rule them all. For me, it just makes it easy. I just have to remember my AD password. I can log in and I can access my vault. Now, you can store other things there as well. You don't have to store just passwords. You're going to store important documents such as passports and driver's licenses. You can also get stored in the vault. You can store the passport option to upload a photo. Everything will be accessible in just a few clicks. You can do online shopping, can get even easier here. All your payment card information. In fact, I store some of my payment cards there. I don't use the Apple Wallet. I use the LastPass for easier access to check out. Honestly, I love this tool. I use this tool. I will use it for life. It is awesome, LastPass. Protect yourself and your business with LastPass, the #1 most preferred password manager trusted by over 43,000 businesses Now, TWiET uses LastPass Enterprise, and we are excited about all their new products. For authentication to access to passwords, LastPass manages every point to your business so you can mitigate risk while improving your employee productivity. Visit LastPass.com/TWiET to find out how they can help you. That's LastPass.com/TWiET. And we thank LastPass for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the TWiET riot. And today is no exception. We have Saeed Ouissal, CEO and founder of ZEDEDA. Saeed, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you coming.
Lou, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Now our audience, and before we get into all the business here, let's go ahead, and our audience really loves to hear about origin stories and people's journey through tech. Can you maybe take us through your journey through technology and how you ended up at ZEDEDA?
Sure. Yeah, it started when I was 7 with a Commodore 64, and those were the days.
Yes, absolutely.
So I grew up with computers in a very early age, so it was sort of logical to go down the route of a computer science degree. So did that. And when I finished school, there were sort of two big things you could work on. One was the Y2K problem, which sounded really boring and definite. And the other thing, obviously, was the internet. So I very early on got involved in sort of building out the original or the first commercial internet backbone. So setting up, getting fiber, putting routers on each side and lighting that up and routing and all that stuff. After that, I spent some time in network equipment vendors that were building out routers and switches and those type of gear for the next phase of the internet, so fixed broadband. So spent a lot of time with the original DSL and cable rollouts. Then spent a lot of time actually on mobile broadband, so kind of the 4G LTE wave in 2006-07. So did that, was with a company called Ericsson you may have heard of. So spent some time there. And then also spent some time in Juniper where I was running the edge routing products in Juniper operating system. And in those days, actually, we did a lot of business around data center build-outs. So the original sort of early cloud build-outs, with the large cloud companies. And all of those sort of led me to do what I do now, actually. So.
Fantastic. Now, it's safe to say you have some experience in enterprise technology then.
Yes. Yeah, I've always spent time either working with telcos or with very large enterprises. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well, let's get into business here because we talk a lot about on the show about IoT. Obviously, Curtis was talking about a little bit before. We talk a lot about the applications and how it's happening. But one of the biggest things we're starting to see in trends is edge computing. This is being huge. They're starting to see it more and more. Maybe you can kind of take us through the landscape, what we're seeing in the enterprise and how businesses are starting to use it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this is all part of sort of that internet wave that we've been in for 20, 30 years now, at least from, the non-academic part of side of things. First we were connecting continents, then we were connecting all the homes, then we connected all the people with mobile broadband. And obviously the last, I would say, decade or so, we've been doing Internet of Things. So we've been connecting more and more devices to the network. This has some profound impact when you do this. And this was also sort of what led us to the inside of, starting a company to address this space. Because if you think about the internet to date, it has actually been built all about downloading content to phones, to homes, your Netflix, your video, cat videos on Facebook, whatever. And this is all shifting dramatically now because we're connecting more and more devices. That's not new. But the insight we sort of 3 years ago saw was like all these devices are also generating more and more amounts of data. And simply put, our internet is not built for uploading data to the cloud. It's actually built for downloading data. So this requires a complete rethink on, well, all that data gets generated now at the edge of the network. How do we process that? How do we make sense out of all that data? And how do we get that data ultimately to the cloud or to all the different data lakes? And that is sort of, I think, the advent of a new wave in computing that people now are starting to call edge computing. I think 3 years ago, we were still debating what they would be called. And we saw an opportunity here to come in and help enterprises to sort of help them with connecting devices to the network securely, processing that data, connecting that data to the cloud, and building towards a future where I think you talked a little bit about AR and AI and in the future, even autonomous systems.
This is fantastic. Now, what areas are you seeing the most uptick in? Obviously, we talked a little bit about, like you said, AR and VR, but are you seeing more of a focus in different parts of the market in specific sets of IoT and edge computing than others?
Yeah, so I think, the way I've always thought about it is sort of three waves of IoT. There's the consumer IoT, and all of us are users of that. I sometimes check how many devices I have on my Wi-Fi network at home, and I think it's over 70. I don't even know what devices are all on my network.
Right.
So that's been going on for a while. But I would say the enterprise and industrial IoT wave is relatively new. I think a lot of enterprises have been experimenting, but we're actually just starting off now seeing large-scale deployments. What we saw the biggest pain is in the industrial IoT space. So we see a lot of customers that are now connecting sensors, connecting machines to the network, trying to gather all that data, process that data, and send it to the cloud. And especially when you're in areas like in a renewable energy space, in the oil and gas space, even in the retail, where you have a large number of remote distributed locations, it becomes quite an operational nightmare to figure out how to put all that compute out there, how to connect all these devices securely on it, how to deploy the applications that make sense of all that data, and how to securely connect that the edge compute back to the cloud. So the industrial IoT, I think, is where the biggest opportunity is, especially if you have like a remote wind farm or solar farm that's hooked up with a 2 meg link or T1 or a T3 or whatever. How do you basically process all that data on that remote site?
So one interesting thing here is that what you said is that they are a lot of more applications enterprise, but that they're more in the manufacturing side. So are you seeing here that, like for instance, in my previous life, I worked in a brewery. I was a systems control engineer, and we did a lot of PLC, development, ladder logic, and so on. Are you seeing traditional applications like this being replaced by IoT, and then businesses looking for platforms and services like yourself to kind of ease the pain in getting started and making sure that they're secure?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's great you bring this up. What we're seeing typically with customers is it is usually a brownfield environment. There's existing machinery, existing wind turbines, existing, PLC controlled whatever systems, et cetera. And the customers obviously are not going to just throw that out the window because now they can connect it to the network. It's not as consumer IoT where, you just throw away your old system and you buy a new network connected system because the cost of acquisition is so low. So we typically see customers coming in and saying, well, can you offer me a solution that can integrate or interoperate with whatever I'm running today? I may have a PLC with some SCADA application running on Windows, works fine. I don't want to change it. But that data that's on that drive of that industrial PC, I'd like to analyze that data and see if I can see insights that help me improve my predictive maintenance schedules, or tell me when the system needs to be serviced, or just generally get a real-time view, load it up in an AR system so now it can be visualized in in an AR interface or whatever. Can you help me do that? And that integration of brownfield and then new greenfield applications coexisting together in a remote site is really the actual one of the first problems we set out to solve. And we did that by actually taking virtualization that obviously has done a phenomenal job in data centers. Everybody is probably familiar with companies like VMware offer for data centers, but taking that virtualization technology and being able to run it on low-cost constrained devices in remote locations.
So I'm glad you kind of went into that, because that was my kind of next question is around virtualization. Now we know with IoT devices, some people kind of envision these small miniature devices that are low compute power. But we're starting to see this uptick of the ability to use virtualization on these devices and be able to do more things on the edge. Can you maybe take us through what we're seeing in the industry and how those applications are happening?
Yeah, sure. So typically what you would see is a customer, they have, let's say, a machine. And, one example, a real life example is one of our customers is like deploying acoustic sensors and other vibration sensors on an asset. And, these sensors generate tremendous amount of data. A typical sensor could generate easily 5 to 10 megabits of raw data per second. So if I have 50 of those sensors or 40 sensors, just one asset, and imagine I have hundreds of those assets in a facility or, a solar farm or wind farm or whatever, how do I get that data to the cloud? I can't. So I deploy a low-cost IoT edge gateway. There's many vendors out there that provide amazing, hardware cost performance. either based on ARM or Intel microprocessors. So as you deploy that system now on site and you hook up those sensors, the next step is I need to deploy an application on these. So what we allow you to do is kind of virtualizing that gateway, deploy the application, which could either be a virtual machine, could be either a Linux container. It doesn't really matter. I think you just got to have to be really flexible around that. And then now you can process all that raw data. And what you then send back to your cloud of choice is actually the anomalies, and then you can keep improving that software. You could even apply machine learning and keep deploying an AI model at that edge that makes ultimately that system over time more and more intelligent, smarter in detecting failures, smarter in detecting the problems that could be happening down the line or will be happening down the line.
So now that we've gotten into virtualization, one thing that obviously I always like to bring up is the kind of the security model around it. Obviously, security is hard. And then you kind of add another layer into there, the virtualization, the Hyper-V, and so on, and the hypervisor. How are things being secure here? Obviously, both in the greenfield side of things and in the brownfield. So you're replacing old technology. You're getting these edge computing devices. You're using virtualization technology. How do you secure these things? How do you make sure that what's the correct model here?
Yeah, no, great question. So, there's sort of three reasons why we love virtualization. And one of the three reasons is security. And if you think about it, all the cloud companies today use virtualization to isolate all the different workloads from each other on servers. So, two companies can run their applications on the same physical server and not having to worry about one company being able to access data on another company is through virtualization. So virtualization itself allows you to do sort of isolation of resources, isolation of applications. You can start thinking about like, okay, I can deploy multiple applications like a firewall network function along with a data analytics function and then two separate virtual machines as an example. The other thing we thought was very important is sort of this notion of zero trust. And I think Curtis also brought this up earlier in the last section, is when you think about sort of the challenges that we're dealing with, is cybersecurity is now extending all the way to physical security. And it's absolutely true in edge computing. If you put edge compute in a remote site, in an insecure site, how do you know somebody's not go in and plug in a USB stick, try to through that introduce malware or any other technique, even compromise the whole system, take it with them, try to basically, look at the SSDs and from there find out information that they could actually use to hack further or find further entry points and increase their attack vectors. So we're a big believer in hardware root of trust. So as part of sort of our open source project that supports our virtualization engine at the edge, we've built all the extensions into like how you integrate with TPM, how you do things like remote attestation, how you remove the whole notion of username and passwords on these devices because they're not really user devices. They're remote little servers. So you should probably not think of them as each of them needing a username, password, or even worse, all of them sharing the same username and password. So security is, I think, equally important next to dealing with the scale problem that we see that edge computing brings to these enterprises.
So I do want to bring my co-host in because obviously Curtis has a unique view of the enterprise. Curtis, you have some questions for Saeed?
Yeah, I do. And Saeed, I think it's interesting. We're talking about the different kinds of architectures that we're seeing as different levels of processing are done at the edge, in edge devices, back in the cloud. From where you're sitting, do you see more companies sort of trying to adopt a standard model when it comes to where the bulk of the computing is going to happen? Or are we in a situation where they're looking at what is most applicable to their particular application?
Yeah, no, I think one of the challenges in IoT and sort of the early IoT solutions that have been available is the proprietariness of many of these solutions. So it's a very fragmented stack. It's very proprietary. I mean, I guess the most common denominator is people use Linux, but after that, it becomes really messy very quickly. So one thing we felt that was very important, especially as we dealt with very large enterprises in our discussions, there's really a need to sort of create a common operating layer at the edge. And as part of our company and as part of our product, we actually initiated an open source project under the Linux Foundation called the Edge Virtualization Engine, or in short, EVE. And the idea is sort of creating the Android for the edge, the same way how Android sort of made it a lot simpler for application developers to build their applications to run on different type of hardware, different type of phones, but also gave services beyond what Linux offers, security services, app store concepts, APIs to developers. Similarly, with our Edge Virtualization Engine initiative that we donated to the Linux Foundation, the idea is to keep building that out. We were the first company that started with that. Now we have actually several large enterprises working on this. Most recently, we took a contribution from Intel, who brought in a new virtualization hypervisor, for instance, into Eve. We've seen other companies in the industrial space and folks in the semiconductor space and others looking also at Eve. And we're part of this LF Edge initiative, which includes other large initiatives around how to standardize on the edge. But this is the project of choice right now for anybody that's thinking about doing enterprise edge computing, deploying remote IoT edge gateways. The idea is you run Eve on these things. It's open source. And coming also back to the security, we're a big believer that security is not done through obscurity. Actually, by having open source and by having more people look at the code, we think we are ultimately going to create a better, more secure solution. And also the ability to keep improving parts where we see weakness, or pick up other open source projects and integrate them in here when they're solving specific security problems out there.
Okay, I truly love the idea of an open and standard environment for edge computing. I think that is a great thing. But I do have to ask a question about that, and you brought up security. We've seen a lot of instances in the last year or two where, whether we're talking about the cloud or virtualization, there have been some significant breaches brought about because of misconfiguration, whether this is someone setting an S3 bucket to public when it shouldn't be, someone leaving protections off of a Docker container by exposing it to the internet when it shouldn't be. So with configuration, a known issue in these more complex environments, how difficult is Eve and your new environment, the open environment, to configure properly? Is this something where most organizations will be able to have internal resources configure these in a safe and secure way? Or is this yet another technology where it's going to require the services of some sort of integration expert to make sure that it's really done properly?
It's a really great question. So this sort of hits the home around what we do as a company. Obviously, part of our company is dedicated to open source and building out Eve. Another part of our company actually is building an enterprise class edge controller. So basically a system that sits in the cloud that does exactly what you just said. It onboards these devices securely. It takes things like remote attestation readings, so we can go back in history and find out if this device is still healthy. We haven't seen a change in its stack. It is there to deploy applications in a way that is really simple, where even you don't need to be a super admin in IT to be able to deploy, let's say, an instance of Azure IT Edge on 1,000 of these gateways, including the configuration, including locking down the networking, firewalls, and all those things. And then, the other thing is continuously monitoring these systems, right? Anomaly detection. So, as these nodes are running, checking the network traffic. Who's this device and this application talking to? Who's talking to it? What's the CPU memory and storage, characteristics? And if something changes, detecting these anomalies and signaling to the user, like, hey, we're seeing this device behaving a little bit different after it received this packet. And we don't know if that means it just got affected through ransomware or anything else. But hey, one click, you can remote console from your browser into that application, get a sense for, okay, is everything healthy? And if not, quickly remedy, close down what went wrong, update the software, which is obviously the other big part of security and managing security, is staying current, not letting vulnerabilities sit out there so they can be exploited by bad actors.
Saeed, thank you so much for being here. We're running a little bit low on time. Our chat room has an interesting question. They wanted to know where the name of the company came from.
Sure. So I'm originally from Morocco. So this is a Moroccan word for something new or innovative. We had to change a little bit the spelling to make it American friendly, but that's the origin of the company's name.
Fantastic. You're talking a little bit about the logo as well. What was the origin of that?
Yeah, so I have an amazing wife, and she's an amazing graphics designer. So she helped both with the name as well as coming up with the logo. We wanted something fresh and something that people could remember one way or the other way.
It's fantastic. Saeed, thank you so much for being here. We do want to give you a chance to maybe tell folks at home where the folks can go to learn more about ZEDEDA, where they can go get started. How can they bring their organization in?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two ways to get started. If you're sort of more a developer or you're keen to kind of understand the mechanics of the product, I recommend you to go to the LF Edge website. So just go Linux Foundation, go to LF Edge, or search for Project Eve or Edge Virtualization Engine. You'll find tons of information there on the architecture, the stack, and everything else. If you're an enterprise like in dire need of helping sort of scale the IoT Edge gateway deployments, connecting to things like AWS and deploying Greengrass or Azure IoT Edge, then just come to our website. There's a little chat app. Just reach out to us, and we're happy to respond back and provide more information.
Fantastic. Well, folks, you've done it again. You've sat through another Out of the Best Dang Enterprise podcast in the universe, according to 9 out of 10 Edge IoT containers. But I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to my very own loner co-host in crime today. But we were the dynamic duo for sure, I think. Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, it's always great to see you, my friend. Where can the folks at home find you and all of your adventures?
Well, as always, they can find my writing at Dark Reading, and especially at the Edge section of Dark Reading. Got a lot of interesting stuff coming up, including some pieces I'm working on things like how using games to teach security. I think that's going to be a fun one given some of the interviews I've had so far. You can always find pointers to what I'm writing, Twitter, KG4GWA, and especially coming off of this weekend where I'm going to be going to a lot of really great art shows and continuing to work on the Maker Faire. Follow me over on Instagram, Curt_Franklin. I try to have some cool and not terribly silly photos over there.
Thanks, Curt. Appreciate you being here. We also want to thank you as well. You are the person who drops in each and every week to watch and listen to our show to get your enterprise goodness and your IT news. We want to make it easy for you to watch and listen to the show and catch up on the enterprise news for the week. Go to our show page right now, twit.tv/TWiET. There you'll find all of our amazing back episodes, plus the show notes, information about the co-hosts, guest information, of course, all the links to the stories we do during the show. But more importantly, next to those videos, you actually see those helpful download and subscribe links to help you support our show. Go ahead and get the version of your choice of the show, both audio version, video version, HD video version, and listen on any one of your devices, on any one of your podcast listening applications, whether it's YouTube or Apple Podcasts. Just go there and subscribe, and you will be supporting us and helping us continue to do the news for you and to get your enterprise goodness. Thank you so much for your support. Now, remember, we also do the show live each and every week on Fridays at 1:30 p.m. Pacific. Feels like 10:30 at live.twit.tv. Of course, you want to come and see how the show is run, see all the behind the scenes. Go ahead and jump on the stream and watch it at 1:30 p.m. Pacific. Of course, if you're going to watch the show live, you might as well go ahead and jump into the chat room as well. We have irc.twit.tv. We have a bunch of great characters in there. They give us some great questions, some great topics, a bunch of different ways to talk about, a bunch of different things to talk about during the show. So don't go ahead and jump into that chat room and be part of the show as well. But don't forget, chat room's great, but you can't always be connected all the time, especially during our live broadcast. So if you can't make it in the chat room, you want to catch up still, we have a discussion. We have a discussion and a community. Check out the new site, twit.community. All of our hosts, our shows, pretty much the entire TWiET army is over there as well. They've started great topics. We have a channel for every one of the shows that we do. So if you want to discuss some of the things that we talked about during the show, or maybe even bring up topics or things that you want us doing during the show, definitely go over there. You can always hit us up as well as at TWiET, at TWiET.twit.tv. And that will that email will come to all of us, including Chibert, who's our producer. And if you want to give us some show topics, so go ahead and hit us up there as well. Also, don't forget you can follow me at twitter.com/LouMM. You know, I post a lot of great things there, and in fact, I post some things that I do during my normal daily work week, as well as after my work week as well, some of my side projects. So go ahead and check that out. Of course, you can also check out what I do at Microsoft at dev.office.com. There we post all the latest and greatest ways for you to customize Office and make it more productive for your organization. I also want to thank everyone who makes the show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support us each and every week to do This Week in Enterprise Tech, and we could not do the show without them. So thank you for all of their support. We also have to thank all the engineers at TWiET, and also thank you to our tireless producer as well, Mr. Brian Shee. He's also our co-host in crime as well, but this week he's out at Wispapalooza over in Vegas. He's gallivanting around there. We'll have to hear about all of his experiences when he comes back, but we definitely couldn't do the show without him because he does all the bookings and the plannings for the show. So thank you for all of his support. Of course, we have to thank our TD for today, Victor. He's the man behind the curtain. He is the man behind all the switches, and we have to definitely include him as well. Victor, you know the tradition. What was the major topic of today's show?
Well, with all the time that I spend with you guys and hearing the great questions that Curt comes up with, he is definitely a journalist that can't be contained to 35 articles a year.
Touche. You know what, Victor? I'm going to give you that win for this week because I definitely agree. I definitely agree. Thanks, Victor. Appreciate it. And until next time, I'm Lou MARESCA, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep TWiET.